the issue of weaponizing tariffs. Why has this problem surfaced? Very simple. A country like India has about 17 to 18% of its exports going to just one market.
Yeah.
If our exposure to the US market had been much lower, clearly President Trump would not have had the leverage vis-a-vis India.
Yeah.
So, what is really happening is that the US is weaponizing dependence of other countries on its markets.
You're on the gist on StratNewsGlobal. I'm Surya Gangadharan. My guest is Abhijit Das, former head of the Center for WTO Studies. He's also been closely involved in trade negotiations in the past when he was in service. Welcome, Abhijit Das. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Surya, for having me back on your show. It's always a privilege to discuss issues of uh, contemporary interest in international trade with you.
And we are looking at, if you haven't already guessed it, viewers, we are talking about the India US FTA, which has been in negotiation for some time. There appears to be, there could be, I mean, I'm going to ask Abhijit about this, but the fact that Prime Minister Modi is not going to the ASEAN summit where he could have met President Trump and perhaps ironed out any wrinkles in the deal does suggest that perhaps. Things are not happening as perhaps they should. Abhijit Das, your reading.
First, Surya, we need to await an official confirmation that Prime Minister Modi will not be going for the ASEAN summit. Assuming that he's not going, it could be for variety of reasons. Trade deal not showing enough progress could be just one of them. On the other hand, if Prime Minister Modi does go for the ASEAN summit, that definitely would be an indicator that we are very close to the finishing line when it comes to the trade deal. But let's await the official position on Prime Minister Modi going to ASEAN summit or not.
Mhm. So, what do you make of the spate of stories that have appeared in the media in the last few days? All hinting at some kind of a deal in the offing, saying that India is giving way on non-GM modified American soybean and so on. What do you make of all this?
It's an open secret that in agriculture, the US interests are centered around soybean, corn, some nuts, some fruits and vegetables, dairy, and poultry. So clearly, the US is negotiating very hard to secure its objectives. On the other hand, we have the assurance from the Indian Prime Minister that the interests of farmers, fishermen, and the dairy sector would not be compromised, would be protected in the final deal. So clearly, there is lots which is happening, and very difficult to say at this juncture whether India has given up its red lines or where the common ground really is. So, exciting times to say the least. So, we just need to have patience and see how things evolve over the next few days or maybe even the next few weeks.
You have written in the Indian Express, sorry, warning against last minute negotiating stratagems by the US. I have your article here. Now, I want you to explain to our viewers exactly what you're saying here.
It's a very common and time tested part of the US negotiating template in multilateral trade negotiations, particularly that at the last minute, US comes in with new issues which it wants to bulldoze through. It also comes up with text which has never been discussed earlier. The US objective clearly is that if a deal is close to finalization, it can push the envelope a bit further at the last minute. And the other party, India being the other party in this case, would be hesitant to let go of a deal and would be also reluctant to have the blame put on its shoulders for collapse of the negotiations. So the US tries to take advantage of both these aspects. And in my article, I have tried to caution the Indian negotiators about this time-tested strategy of US. And there is no harm in the deal taking a longer time, but we must not become victims to the US stratagems at the last minute at the negotiating table.
You flagged off a couple of points here. Let me read them out. Both sides must agree to a written document before its contents are announced. India must look out for the US making new demands in the final stages of the negotiation and insisting on them as a condition for closing the deal. Trump weaponized tariffs provides an important lesson to the rest of the world, being dependent on one market. Would you like to expand on that a bit?
Let me start with the issue of weaponizing tariffs. Why has this problem surfaced? Very simple. A country like India has about 17 to 18% of its exports going to just one market.
Yeah.
If our exposure to the US market had been much lower, clearly President Trump would not have had the leverage vis a vis India.
Yeah.
So, what is really happening is that the US is weaponizing dependence of other countries on its markets, and this weaponization is happening through tariffs. So, what I really seek to alert the government is that the trade deal should not become an instrument whereby our reliance, our dependence on the US market for our export grows further. That should not happen. And that could happen through multiple channels. For example, India giving a commitment to purchase X quantity of US products, the way China gave a commitment when it was under Trump 1. So
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
need to guard against becoming over dependent on the US market. We have to diversify. We cannot put most of our eggs in the US market. So that's one very important issue which our negotiators should watch out for. The second important issue is what we hear in the media and what I have heard from, of course, not first hand sources, second hand sources, quoting officials of some of the countries with which US has finalized the bilateral deal. Apparently, what got finalized at the level of officials between US and the partner countries, those got changed unilaterally by President Trump, particularly in his conversation with the leaders of the other countries. So the
Mhm.
other countries didn't have an opportunity to prevent President Trump from unilaterally announcing the deals, which were, in a way, tilted against the interests of the partner countries as they went beyond what had been finalized by the officials. And it, in a way, suggested that the partner countries had agreed to grant deeper concessions that what had actually not been agreed to. So
Mhm.
we need to be very clear that before the bilateral deal between India and US is announced, we have a written document which very clearly lays down what has been agreed by the two sides. So President Trump, in his enthusiasm, does not announce something which has not been agreed by the officials of the two sides.
Would you say that Modi not going is an indication that risk is there? That Modi lands up there, this guy goes and says, "We have done this and done that," and then sets, puts up a fait accompli.
I think the Indian government, the Prime Minister's office, the foreign policy establishment is cognizant of this risk. And I'm also pretty certain that they would have prepared for this eventuality.
Hmm.
And we have the benefit of the adverse experience of other countries. So even if Prime Minister Narendra Modi had gone for the ASEAN meeting, I'm sure our side would have put in some guardrails to prevent President Trump from making a unilateral announcement of the conclusion
Hmm.
of the trade deal.
In that sense, how would you describe these ongoing negotiations? Are they unique? Are they different? Do they parallel what we've seen in what you've seen in earlier trade negotiations?
No, these negotiations are very unique, one of its type completely, for the very simple reason that one party is driving the agenda completely.
Yeah.
The partner countries have, at best, to their objective really is damage limitation, damage control, and the partner countries are really not in a position to seek concessions from US. That is not how multilateral negotiations or even bilateral negotiations take place. In bilateral negotiations, there is a give and take. Over here, what has happened is that US has imposed illegal tariffs on India and a large number of other countries. And it's bargaining those illegal tariffs. It's promising to reduce some of those illegal tariffs in return for the partner country granting concessions which go well beyond what should actually what prevails under the WTO rules. So these negotiations are very, very different from normal negotiations. And also, normal negotiations proceed on the basis of written texts, and
Yeah.
there is an iterative process to find a common ground. I'm not sure whether that process is being followed over here. Then, in normal negotiations, more often than not, governments undertake stakeholder consultations.
Hmm.
I'm not sure whether, in the case of India US bilateral deal, how many stakeholder consultations have actually been held by the government. If they've been held, I'm not aware. I have not seen media reports, but hopefully the government has been consulting all stakeholders who might get adversely impacted or who might stand to benefit from the trade deal. So let's see what the final outcome is. But to cut a long story short, yes, these negotiations are very unique, very unusual, and certainly not a model to be followed in future.
Hmm. Are they also very secret? I mean, nothing seems to be coming on other than what perhaps Piyush Goyal says from somewhere.
Yes, these negotiations are very secret. In fact, there has been a trend over the past decade whereby US gets the partner countries to sign on to a non-disclosure requirement that whatever transpires in the negotiating room will not be disclosed. Now, this does disadvantage the other partner countries for the very simple reason that if they want to consult experts, if they want to consult stakeholders, then such a non disclosure agreement does put a constraint in that. Now, I don't know
Mhm.
whether in the India US bilateral trade agreement negotiations, the two sides have signed a non disclosure agreement. But if such a non disclosure agreement has been signed by India and US, then certainly that could explain the huge secrecy which is surrounding these negotiations.
Mhm. Abhijit, you're sounding very alarming. I mean, I never realized these negotiations are so tricky. Let me go on to the next question on the digital economy, which you've also written about. What are America's core interests here, and what is it trying to do with us?
Let's be clear about one thing: the future economic activities in the developed world and in much of the larger developing countries is likely to shift to digital activities.
Mhm.
Now, the race over here really is who will provide digital services, who will provide digital products. Will it be the developed world, or will it be a few developing countries like India, which have a huge mass of data on account of their large population?
Yeah.
Now, if India is able to leverage its data advantage, then it could become, at least in the domestic market, supplier of domestic digital products. And that could prevent the US digital giants from servicing the Indian market. So,
Mhm.
the first objective of the US big tech is to prevent India from leveraging its data advantage, in particular, to prevent the government from sharing anonymized government data exclusively with Indian
Mhm.
entities. Now, that could have been one channel, a legitimate channel for giving a boost to Indian digital startups or Indian players in the domestic market.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that needs to be nipped in the bud by US. The second objective of big tech is it hates to pay taxes. So it would try to use the bilateral trade agreement negotiations to make sure that it pays no tax in India. We've already seen how earlier this year India withdrew the equalization levy, and that
Yeah.
certainly was, it would be no exaggeration to state that it really helped the US big tech. So that might in a way get formalized by tying the hands of the government from raising revenue from digital players. That could work through multiple channels. One channel would be something called moratorium on customs duties on electronic transmissions, something
Mhm.
which is an active issue at the WTO. The United States might want a permanent moratorium. And also, if we agree to give a non discriminatory treatment to US digital services and digital service suppliers, then effectively we would have an overwhelming dominance of US digital players in
Yeah.
our market. And then
Mhm.
if we try to tax the digital services or digital service suppliers, US would say, well, you're targeting me, you're being discriminatory. So even if the tax were to apply on all digital players operating in India, since there would be overwhelmingly US digital players,
Yeah. Mhm.
non discriminatory treatment could be used as a leverage by US to prevent us from raising revenues in the digital sector. So these are some of the key issues. Another important issue is deregulation. Big tech does not like regulation. It wants to operate the way whatever way with that could maximize its profits. So through trade agreements, it has tried to tie the hands of governments from regulating it. And there could be an apprehension that the bilateral trade agreement negotiations could be used as an opportunity by the US big tech to put some fetters around our government from effectively regulating big tech. So these are some of the critical areas of interest of US big tech. But I'm hopeful that the government is cognizant of the risks. Government hopefully is aware that agreeing to what the US big tech wants would really compromise our digital future. We would end up becoming just consumers of digital products created in
Yeah.
US, and we would not ourselves be in a position to create employment, generate incomes from digital activities.
Currently, what is the status? Do American digital players and our own people, are they on the same level?
We have the flexibility if we want to bend in favor of our players. Nothing stops
Mhm.
the government from doing so. But once we give a commitment on non discriminatory treatment, then the
Yeah.
elbow room that we have, the policy space that we have, we would virtually then would be required to give up that policy space. So at this juncture, we have the policy space, we can use it. In many instances we've not used it, but that doesn't mean the government will not use it in future. We need to
Mhm.
preserve the policy space for the government to create domestic digital champions.
Mhm. And is there any tax on the American digital giants here?
We had the equalization levy, which we that was not targeted at American digital giants. That was on any foreign digital player. But
Mhm.
as I mentioned earlier, we removed it a few months back. Then there could be a possibility of imposing customs duties on electronic transmissions. But because there is a temporary moratorium, not a permanent moratorium, a temporary moratorium at the WTO, we are not
Mhm.
in a position to impose these customs duties. So at this juncture, we have an opportunity to tax digital players. We are not doing so, but we should preserve the right to do so in future.
Tell me on agriculture and dairy, these repeated statements from government that these are our red lines, they will be protected. And you may have also come across some of those reports that some non-GM soya and non-GM maize would be allowed in. I mean, could you give us make some sense out of this?
We already give what is called a tariff rate quota on maize. In most of the years, the tariff rate quota does not get filled.
Hmm.
So one possibility could be that uh, US might seek to enhance its exports of corn or maize through that existing tariff rate quota arrangement at the WTO.
Hmm.
When it comes to soybean, there the picture is a bit different. My recollection is that we do not have a tariff rate quota on soybean. So if we are going to allow uh, increased imports of soybean, that would require us to give a new concession.
Hmm.
And we will have to see how what mechanisms are put in place for allowing imports, greater imports of soybean. One option could be that we would give a commitment on tariff rate quota, whereby a particular quantity of soybean would get imported at a lower duty. That could
Hmm.
provide a common ground, but there two important points need to be borne in mind. First and foremost, if we are giving a tariff rate quota on soybean, then the quantity that we would allow should not exceed 3 to 4% of our domestic consumption. And second, given the fact that US agriculture is so heavily subsidized,
Yeah.
we must put a floor on the price at which the soybean would be imported under the tariff rate quota. If the price falls below the negotiated floor price, then sorry, that import consignment should not benefit from the tariff rate quota. So if some of these safeguards are built in, then maybe we could have a common ground on providing access to US for enhancing its soybean exports to India.
Abhijit, in these negotiations with the US, especially, given the huge asymmetry, um, I mean, do you really think a mutually beneficial trade treaty can actually come off?
A very good question, Surya. Now, to make an assessment of what is will be a mutually beneficial treaty, we need to
Hmm.
go back to 13th February. That was the date when Prime Minister Modi met President Trump, and they
Yeah.
came out with a joint statement, which embodied the commitment to negotiate a multi-sectoral, mutually beneficial bilateral trade agreement. So if we take 13th February as the critical date, then the outcome of the BTA negotiations, we should really see how have our rights and obligations vis-a-vis US changed compared to what existed on 13th February. On 13th
Hmm.
February, we were not facing any reciprocal tariffs. We were not
Yeah.
facing any 25% Russian oil penalty. We were just facing the WTO mandated most favored nation tariff. So,
Hmm.
if at the conclusion of the bilateral trade agreement negotiations, we give concessions on the one hand, and US merely reduces the 50% tariffs, illegal tariffs, to let us say 20% or 15%, then they are
Yeah.
still higher than what existed on 13th February.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
In that situation, would you call it a mutually beneficial agreement? I would think
Hmm.
not. Of course, some would argue that, well, it is still lower than 50%, but then to
Hmm.
get that lowered, you have given lots of concessions.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
concessions could be justified if US were to lower its tariffs as they prevailed on 13th February, but that's very unlikely to happen. And if that is not likely to happen, then definitely it's more than a Herculean task to secure a mutually beneficial agreement. And that's why the task of our trade negotiators is very, very difficult.
Is walking away from these negotiations an option in the event we are not able to strike, you know, a favorable deal or a mutually acceptable deal?
We should always be prepared for that eventuality.
But we have never done that before.
We have done that before. RCEP negotiation is a good illustration.
Yeah.
In November 2019, we walked away from the uh, RCEP negotiations, and that continues to be relevant even today. If the outcome of our bilateral trade agreement negotiations with US is skewed against our interests,
Hmm.
then in the long term perspective, it may be in our interest to walk away from the negotiating table. Let's bear in mind that these negotiations really are about getting market access into the US,
Yeah.
but
Mm.
conceding grounds in areas of the future like digital.
Mm.
So, is that a compromise worth striking? It'll really depend on what are the terms and conditions. But if the terms and conditions require us to make huge compromises, give huge concessions, make binding commitments in the area of digital, as well as open agricultural markets in very sensitive products, then that should ring alarm bells, that should flash the red light that, well, this is a deal from which maybe we are better off by walking away.
Last word, Abhijit. What do you expect will happen?
I wish I had a clear answer to that question. My own sense is that uh, sooner rather than later, we might end up with some sort of a trade deal with a
Mhm.
promise to continue negotiations in the future.
Okay. That is something the Americans had objected to, isn't it? A mini deal followed by something bigger?
That is already enshrined in the 13th February outcome document, where they talk of the first phase of the trade deal
Hmm.
by autumn. So that
Okay.
itself recognized that a comprehensive deal is not possible in a short time. A
Mhm.
comprehensive agreement will take much longer time. So let's do things in phases. So we need to extend that idea even to the first phase, that if the entire what was envisaged in the first phase is not possible by autumn, then let's at least clinch some things. And President Trump may not be averse to it. He likes big announcements.
Hmm.
So he might want a few headline items, and that might satisfy him. So let's see how the dynamics evolves.
Even a mini big deal is okay with him, as long as
I,
he gets to announce it.
as long as he gets to announce some big headlines, uh,
Yeah.
I think from the perspective of optics and from the perspective of his domestic constituencies, he may not be averse to it.
So for all you know, we'll have a mini deal, if not soon, sometime going forward, and hopefully it'll be done before the end of this year. Uh, I expect. Is that optimistic or?
That I think is a reasonable expectation. Although I would say that if we are looking at a time horizon of the end of the year, then maybe by that time we might have the phase one of the trade agreement concluded.
Abhijit Das, on that note, thank you very much for that insight. And going forward, let's see what kind of a trade deal shapes up. And it'll be interesting, of course, as a journalist, if we walk out, that'll be a whole new ball game then. Abhijit Das, thank you very much. Great talking to you. Great talking to you. That's all we have for you in this broadcast. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media. Thanks very much.